For the past few weeks, one game keeps showing up everywhere in the gaming world. Clips of massive battles, brutal sword combat, huge landscapes stretching across mountains, forests, and medieval cities. That game is Crimson Desert. At first glance, it looks like just another fantasy RPG. But the more gameplay people see, the more it becomes clear that this game might be trying something much bigger. From incredibly detailed combat systems to a massive open world filled with dynamic events, Crimson Desert is starting to look like one of the most ambitious games in years. So why is everyone suddenly talking about it? Let's take a closer look at what Crimson Desert actually is, what makes it different from other open-world games, and why so many players think it could become one of the biggest releases in modern gaming. One of the first things that grabs people's attention is the scale of the world. Crimson Desert takes place in a massive continent called Pyrule, a land filled with kingdoms, deserts, forests, frozen mountains, and ancient ruins. But what makes it interesting isn't just the size. It's how alive the world appears to be. Gameplay footage shows towns bustling with activity, soldiers marching through the streets, wildlife roaming the wilderness, and weather systems that change the entire atmosphere of the environment. In some moments the world looks calm and peaceful. In others it feels chaotic and dangerous. Players ride across wide plains on horseback, climb cliffs, glide through the air, and explore ruins hidden deep in remote areas of the map. It's the kind of world that seems designed not just for missions, but for exploration. And that sense of freedom is something many players feel has been missing from modern open-world games. As more gameplay footage started appearing online, many players began drawing comparisons between Crimson Desert and one of the most respected RPGs ever made, The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt. The comparison mainly comes from the tone and structure of the world. Both games take place in grounded medieval fantasy settings where political conflict, war, and survival shape the lives of the people living there. Instead of a bright, heroic fantasy world, the atmosphere feels rough, realistic, and sometimes brutal. There are also similarities in how exploration appears to work. Gameplay shows players traveling through forests, villages, battlefields, and ruins that feel naturally placed within the environment rather than existing purely as locations for quests. The story direction also contributes to the comparison. Crimson Desert follows a mercenary leader named Cliff and his group known as the Grey Manes, navigating a continent filled with competing factions and dangerous forces. That kind of character-focused journey through a conflicted world is something fans of narrative RPGs often appreciate. However, Crimson Desert clearly has its own identity. The combat system appears far more physical and action-driven, with characters grappling enemies, using environmental attacks, and engaging in large cinematic battles that go beyond traditional RPG encounters. Because of these elements, many players see echoes of what made games like The Witcher so memorable, while also noticing the ways Crimson Desert is pushing things in a different direction. Whether it ultimately reaches the same level of impact is something that only time will tell. But the fact that people are already making those comparisons says a lot about the expectations surrounding this game. Another major reason Crimson Desert is getting so much attention is its combat system. Most fantasy RPGs follow a fairly familiar formula: light attacks, heavy attacks, maybe a few special abilities. But Crimson Desert appears to be pushing combat much further. Gameplay trailers show a mix of sword fighting, grappling, environmental attacks, and cinematic finishing moves. Characters can throw enemies, slam them into walls, leap through the air, or chain together multiple attacks in rapid succession. It feels closer to an action game than a traditional RPG. What makes it even more impressive is how physical the combat looks. Enemies react realistically when they're hit. Characters stumble, fall, and crash into objects around them. Some fights even involve large groups of enemies where the battlefield becomes chaotic and unpredictable. Instead of feeling like scripted encounters, battles look more like dynamic events unfolding in real time. And that kind of combat system is something players have been wanting for years. If there's one thing that instantly caught the internet's attention, it's the boss fights. Some of the enemies shown in gameplay footage are absolutely enormous. Giant creatures towering over cities. Massive monsters crashing through buildings. And battles that look more like cinematic movie scenes than traditional video game fights. But what makes these bosses interesting isn't just their size. It's the way players interact with them. Instead of simply attacking from the ground, players climb, dodge, grapple, and use the environment to survive. The scale of these encounters gives them a feeling that's closer to epic fantasy films than most RPG boss fights. And because these moments are so visually dramatic, clips from these battles have spread quickly across gaming communities online. While gameplay has been the main focus so far, the story of Crimson Desert is also drawing attention. The game follows a mercenary leader named Cliff and his group known as the Greymanes. They travel across the continent of Pyrewell, taking on dangerous missions while struggling to survive in a world filled with political conflict, war, and betrayal. Unlike many fantasy stories focused purely on heroes and legends, this one seems more grounded. The characters are not kings or chosen heroes. They're mercenaries trying to survive in a brutal world. That perspective could give the story a more personal tone compared to typical fantasy RPGs. Instead of saving the world, the focus appears to be on surviving it. And that kind of narrative approach often creates much more interesting characters. Another reason people keep talking about Crimson Desert is the graphics. Many viewers initially assumed some gameplay clips were pre-rendered cinematics. But most of what has been shown is actual gameplay. Lighting systems create dramatic sunsets and stormy skies. Character animations are incredibly detailed. And environmental destruction adds a level of realism that makes battles feel intense and unpredictable. When combined with the scale of the world and the fast-paced combat, the visuals give the entire game a cinematic feel. It's the kind of presentation that makes people stop scrolling and watch. And that's exactly why so many gameplay clips have been spreading across social media. But maybe the biggest reason Crimson Desert is getting so much attention is something deeper. Games like this have become rare. In recent years, many large studios have focused heavily on live service models, multiplayer experiences, or smaller-scale projects. Huge single-player open-world adventures with this level of ambition don't appear as often anymore. Crimson Desert looks like a game that is trying to combine several things at once. A massive open world, deep action combat, large cinematic battles, and a story-driven single-player experience. If it succeeds, it could fill a space in the industry that many players feel has been missing. And that possibility is what has people so curious about it. Right now, Crimson Desert is still surrounded by a lot of mystery. We've seen impressive gameplay, massive battles, and a world that looks incredibly detailed. But the real question is whether the full game will deliver on all that potential. If it does, it could easily become one of the most talked about games of the next few years. But if it falls short, it wouldn't be the first ambitious project to struggle under the weight of its own expectations. Either way, one thing is clear. Crimson Desert has captured the attention of the gaming world. And everyone is watching to see what happens next.